Greece. April 1967. A group of colonels seized power, arresting citizens and politicians. Among them, a man who was an economics professor at Harvard University.
The sergeant put a Tommy gun to my throat, and he said, "I'll kill you if you don't tell us where your father is."
A political activist.
The regime will crack up.
Είχε μπολιαστεί με τις αριστερές ιδέες.
The man who became Greece's first ever socialist prime minister.
I am very moved tonight by the tremendous popular support of the program of change that PASOK has promised to the Greek people.
One who's considered as a left-leaning demagogue and praised as a savior of people's rights. That was Ανδρέας Παπανδρέου. Ανδρέας Παπανδρέου was loved and despised in about equal measure.
Playing a role in the Balkans, playing a role in the Middle East, playing a role in world politics, even though a small country.
But in his 31-year political career, he mesmerized a good portion of the Greek nation like few other individuals.
Το ΠΑΣΟΚ στην κυβέρνηση και ο λαός στην εξουσία. Έτσι ώστε επιτέλους κάποτε των Αθηνών να μπορούμε να λέμε ότι η Ελλάδα ανήκει στο λαό της, ότι η Ελλάδα ανήκει στους Έλληνες.
He had almost a mystic relationship with the people. He was a great orator, but he spoke to the people, and the people believed that Andreas Papandreou was a man who would take care of their problems.
Andreas Papandreu had huge amounts of personal charisma and was notoriously attractive to women. He went through 3 marriages and several sticky scandals without it eroding his mystique.
He did like women, of course. That included me.
For 3 decades, to friend and foe, he was simply Andreas, one of a kind.
Μπορούσε να δει το τι θα γινόταν, ας πούμε, στην πολιτική σκακέρα, την παγκόσμια πολιτική σκακέρα. Κούναγε στο ένα πιόνι. Τι σήμαινε αυτό, τι αντίδραση θα είχε, και όχι εκείνη τη στιγμή, σε 30 χρόνια.
What kind of man was this? Greece's first socialist leader. A magnet for the masses, and held in reverence by many thousands of Greeks even now.
I don't know another instance where a politician starts a party from zero and within 7 years has the majority in parliament. That's a phenomenon.
Andreas Papandreu was born on the 5th of February 1919 on the island of Chios. His father George was then a rising young liberal politician. His mother, Sofia Mineiko, was the daughter of a Polish army officer and adventurer who had settled in Greece. Andreas was enrolled in a private school. The family was quite well off by Greek standards. He seems to have been an average pupil until the 5th form, when he suddenly fell to the bottom of his class. Family trouble could have played its part. That was the year 1928 that his father and mother finally divorced.
He grew up an only son with his mother, and those who study psychology and things like that know that that has a different effect than if you grew up in a large family. And I suppose that he felt a sense of rejection from the father and a desire to prove himself.
His mother took him to live with her in a smart house in the upscale Athens suburb of Psychiko. The change seems to have cleared Andreas' young mind. In the 6th form in the prestigious Athens College, he shot to the top of his class. In high school, Andreas' mind turned outwards, in the direction of Marxism, very much in vogue in the early 1930s.
Now, his world, he was at a very good high school, Athens College, but, you know, intellectuals often in good high schools become quite radicalized if the environment is such, and some of his writings were about Marxism and Trotskyism. In terms of the Marxist world, he was completely anti-Stalinist and never a pro-Soviet kind of younger person.
With two schoolmates, he edited a radical journal, which got him into trouble with the authorities.
Είχε μπολιαστεί με τις αριστερές ιδέες. Στα νιάτα του, στα πρώιμα νιάτα του, εκεί στην ηλικία την εφηβική, ως τα 20 χρόνια και πριν φύγει για την Αμερική, είχε σοσιαλιστικές ιδέες.
In 1936, the dictator Metaxas seized power. Metaxas was committed to stifling leftist tendencies. Andreas' father was arrested.
Now in the 30s, you have to remember Greece was under a dictatorship, so his coming of age saw his own father being exiled away from Athens, and he would visit his father when he was allowed, and in the exiled area, so he was right away in the political world.
Την εποχή των σπουδών του ανήκε σε μια μικρή κλειστή τροτσκιστική ομάδα της άκρας αριστεράς, κάτι που δεν άρεσε καθόλου στον πατέρα του, στον Γεώργιο Παπανδρέου, μια ομάδα που εκκινεί το πολύ αριστερότερα του αστικού σοσιαλισμού, με αποτέλεσμα να έχει και προβλήματα τότε ως φοιτητής, προβλήματα που εντοπίζονταν, αν θυμάμαι καλά, την περίοδο 1937-1939.
In 1940, Andreas, by now a militant law student, was able to escape the regime's clutches and sail to America, where he studied economics at Harvard University. Months after he left, Greece was at war, along with most of Europe. The last thing Andreas wanted to do was return and fight. So he did the next best thing and enlisted in the US Navy. After spending the last 2 years of the Second World War in rear echelon service, Andreas was rewarded with American citizenship in 1946. He took up the teaching of economics at Harvard University, in the company of such rising political men as John F. Kennedy.
Τον Ανδρέα τον έχουν αξιολογήσει μεγάλη ακαδημαϊκή άνδρεση στην Αμερική ως έναν από τους 10 έως 15 εξαιρετικούς οικονομολόγους της μεταπολεμικής περίοδου. Συνεργάτης του Σουίζη, του Κέισεν, του Σερβενσρέιμερ, όλα αυτά νομίζω ότι δίδουν το ειδικό βάρος του οικονομολόγου.
He had left Greece behind him and had no political ambitions, until he walked into a dentist's office in Minneapolis one day in February 1948 and met a young public relations woman named Margaret Chant.
I think it's always interesting to know how people meet each other. I never expected that I would meet my future husband in a dentist's office. We got into a political discussion, and we both had a great deal of interest in international affairs. So there was an immediate attraction to the fact that we were speaking at the same level and with the same basic philosophy and the same basic ideology. He was very charming. We ended up having dinner together and dancing, and that was the first evening, and by the time I got home, I felt I had fallen in love.
There was one big snag. He was already married to a Greek-American psychiatrist on the East Coast. He was married to Christina Rassia for 9 years, but the marriage had been strained from the first.
His first wife's book, Rassia, she's a psychologist. If I'm not mistaken, she's a child psychologist, a very successful one, by the way, in the States. And she wrote a book about him. And although you can see that she didn't exactly like him very much, but still you can get some kind of insight in this man. She says that he's a man that thought that everybody owed him, and that he owed nothing to anyone. And judging from his reign afterwards, I don't think she was very far off the point. It is that way. He was a man that really thought that everybody owed him something.
A year after he and Margaret were married, Andreas joined the American Democratic Party's drive to elect Adlai Stevenson as president.
He was always very involved in politics from his youth. Even in the United States, as an academic, he was close to the Humphrey campaign in Minnesota, the Adlai Stevenson campaign when he was in California, and many of the associates of Kennedy, many of the economists that worked for Kennedy. So he was very active.
Stevenson lost the 1952 presidential election. But one key word that he used stuck with Andreas and proved to be the magical element in his own leadership campaign 30 years later. That word was change, Αλλαγή in Greek. Greece in 1961 was a